folks, and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Knowledge. In today's society and culture, people mistakenly think that everything they need to know is simply a click away. And why wouldn't they? Every textbook that's ever been written is available online. Any expert in whatever field of expertise you might want to hear is available with a click of the mouse, and you can pull them up and hear them orate for a while. So we've gotten spoiled, and some knowledge that should just be inherent in a person, unfortunately, is not anymore because of the ease of access to the internet. One of the best illustrations I have of this phenomena happened 30 years ago this month. I was still teaching agriculture at the university at that time, and I had a class full of upperclassmen, juniors and seniors, in a class that was titled Soil Conservation and Water Management. I taught that class every fall. Really enjoyed teaching it. Really enjoyed these students. But 80% of them were from urban areas like Kansas City and St. Louis. Now, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember 1993, 30 years ago, but this area that I live in Missouri, was subject to probably the most horrendous flooding that this area had experienced in the past 100 years. It was just devastating. And Kansas City, because it's on the Missouri River, and St. Louis, because it's where the Missouri and the Mississippi meet, were extra hard hit with the flooding. And teaching this class, of which there were very few farm kids, I always prided myself in keeping the information that I taught very practical. Now, theory is important for them to learn, but practicality means more in the long run than theory. We'd gone through about half the semester, and we had a great textbook, and the class was keeping up pretty good. But about halfway through the semester, I started this class one morning with a simple question. I said, since most of you are from Kansas City or St. Louis, can anybody tell me why the flooding was so horrendous in those two areas this past summer? Well, unlike farm kids, these kids with an urban background are very willing to participate in class, and hands shot up all over the class. So I called on a young man over on the right side of the class first. And he said, I think I know why the flooding was so bad. He said, I blame it on the Corps of Engineers because they have failed miserably to keep the bottoms of both the Missouri and the Mississippi River dredged out of silt. Therefore, the rivers can't have as much capacity, and that water has to go somewhere, so it overflowed the banks and flooded the cities. Now, I complimented him on that because that's one thing we had studied in the first half of the semester. But I said, are there other reasons? Well, this young lady in the middle of the class, she raises her hand. And I said, yes, tell us why you think the flooding was so bad. And she said, well, I blame it on the city of Kansas City and the city of St. Louis because they have allowed this urban development to go unchecked. They've put in subdivisions and shopping malls, and they have paved parking lots over acres and acres of it with asphalt and concrete, neither of which will allow water to absorb through it. The water, that creates more runoff. That's what led to the horrendous flooding. And I complimented her on that topic because we had studied that as well. Finally, there was a young man on the far left of the classroom, and he said, because of your background, you're going to disagree with this, but he said, I blame all this flooding on farming. He said, farmers have plowed up land, clear-cut timber, and plowed up the land that should never have been tilled, and they've planted soil-exposing row crops like corn and soybeans, and they don't prevent the runoff like timber and natural vegetation does. So that has led to so much runoff, and that's what led to all the flooding. Well, in their textbooks, all three of those subjects had been covered, and they had learned them. There were 3 or 4 farm kids in the group, and like I was when I was in college. I always thought if I didn't make eye contact with the professor, they wouldn't call on me. So I saw this kid on the very back row, a young man that I knew where his farm was, that he'd grown up on a farm. He was sitting on the back row, had his cap kind of pulled down over his eyes, not to make eye contact. So I called on him and I said, "Hey, Kevin." And he, "Yes, sir." I said, "Do you have any idea why the flooding was so bad in Kansas City and St. Louis this past summer?" And he said, "Yes, I do. It rained too damn much." And the class began to laugh. And I said, "Now stop right there." I said, "This is the correct answer. In this area of the Midwest, we normally, in a normal year, receive about 40 to 42 inches of rainfall, depending upon what part of the state you live in. We had received our total annual yearly rainfall by the end of June in 1993. And when it rains that much, that quickly, and the majority of it April, May, and June, they didn't realize the most simple thing they should have learned is that water runs downhill until it has no place to go. And then it just pools up. And that's what had led to all the flooding. Now, these other three things might have contributed to a little extra flooding, but the fact of the matter was it had rained way too much for all the systems to take care of that much runoff. Now, realizing that it had rained too much should have been something that they just knew, but not growing up on a farm or not being dependent upon weather knowledge, they didn't realize that. They only knew what they had learned and read out of a textbook. When it rains too much, it's likely to flood. Well, thanks for tuning in today for another episode of Forgotten Knowledge, and hopefully you'll remember that when it rains too much, you might need to seek higher ground. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.